second presentation. And first, I do want to acknowledge Dean Slayton. I meant to introduce you because I forgot, and I call him Admiral, but no, Commander Dean Slayton from Hoover, who's the life of this. So thanks for being there. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge Jeanette LaFleur, who is the client for this presentation that you're about to hear. She's from Education Trust West. And again, this presentation is called The Measurement Gap, How Teachers Are Evaluated, Developed, and Dismissed in California. Thanks. And I will turn it on to Chris Frey, who will be the first speaker.
Thanks a lot, Joe. And thanks to all of you for coming out to be here for our Public Policy Practicum Project presentation. Public Policy Project Practicum presentation. I think I messed that up the second time through. But we're really excited. My name is Chris. This is Dennis and Mike. We're really excited to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over the last 5 months. We've been working on a project examining teacher evaluation, development, and dismissal policy in California for the Education Trust West. And we're going to talk to you about some of the shortcomings in the current evaluation process and how those impact teacher quality in California. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just adjust this so I can see my notes. The first thing we're going to do is go over a quick project overview, a little bit of background on the California education system as we're going through it. Then we'll get into our research questions, talk about our data collection strategy, go over our results, and then some of the implications of our findings. So the first thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about the California education system. There are about 10,500 K-12 schools in California, over 1,100 districts that serve about 6 million students. And the system is currently in trouble. A recent report by the Editorial Projects and Education Research Center ranked California 35th out of 50 states and gave the state a D for
Microsoft.
So private institutions aren't too much better off right now.
You got it.
All right, great. So, as I was saying, California ranked towards the bottom in terms of student achievement measures. And while there are a number of causes that contribute to student achievement, we really wanted to focus on teachers. There are other things, such as class size, per pupil spending, the sort of home life that students have outside of school. But we have reason to believe that there is that the quality of education that students receive from their teachers is a big predictor of actual student success. So for example, one study showed that students in 5th through 8th grade who were taught by teachers in the 90th percentile or above actually ended up earning about $20,000 more per year in their career, in their jobs afterwards, than similar students who were taught by teachers in the 60th percentile. So there can be really long-ranging effects of the quality of teachers that you have that go beyond just when they exit the classroom. And being able to either improve or remove these teachers to improve the quality of instruction is very important. A lot of the recent attention has been on the dismissal process, and this has been in large part due to several really high-profile abuse cases that have happened in public schools, where teachers have lingered on and continue to be paid by the California education system despite really obvious and heinous acts against students. And what the criticism has been is that we should be dismissing these teachers a lot faster. They shouldn't even be on the payroll. And what we thought was that, well, okay, it's a little bit unfair to say, okay, well, the solution to this problem is that we just get rid of all the bad teachers. And what we found was that instead we want to take a step back and actually look at the evaluation process. Because one of the things we found is that if you're looking at any of these, dismissal, evaluation, or development, they're really all intertwined. And so, for example, if you're not accurately evaluating students, then it's really hard to either make a case to dismiss or to even properly develop students. When we first started our project, we were looking to see if there was any data on dismissals, and the fact is there just isn't very much. Between 1996 and 2005, for example, just 100 dismissal cases made it to hearing in the state of California. So that's just about 10 per year. And that signaled to us that, while there might be problems with the dismissal process, we need to move further upstream. It's not as if there's a huge queue of teachers that are going into the dismissal process and just never making it out because it's expensive or arduous. It really goes back to evaluation. And the fact is, again, if evaluations aren't being fairly done, then it's not really, it's hard to make a case to dismiss a teacher, and it also isn't giving teachers the feedback that they need in order to improve their craft. So with that, I'm going to move on to some of the research questions that we had that, going into the study. They can be grouped into roughly 3 buckets: teacher evaluation, teacher development, and teacher dismissal. With regards to teacher evaluation, we asked how are teachers evaluated and measured, and then do formal evaluations actually reflect teacher performance, and if they don't, why don't they? Next, we wanted to ask a couple questions about teacher development. Do California school districts attempt to develop underperforming teachers? And what are the benefits of an effective development program? And then finally, with regards to dismissal, we asked, do California school administrators attempt to remove teachers they consider to be underperforming? And other than the formal dismissal process, what strategies do administrators employ to remove underperforming teachers from their staff? So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mike, who's going to talk a little bit about our data collection.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so to address our main research questions, we utilized 3 primary sources of data. We began our project with qualitative interviews. We spoke to a variety of principals, superintendents, human resource officers, the California Teachers Association, which is the teachers union in California, and also just various members of advocacy groups around the state. And the general impression we got from them is that there's a lack of systematic research on administrators' sort of view of the evaluation system, how evaluations are conducted. And so this kind of spurred us to create and disseminate our own online survey for administrators. We created 3 separate surveys, one for principals, one for human resource officers, and one for superintendents. And then I'll show you some of the results of that in a second. But another thing that our qualitative interviews exposed us to was a relationship with the Educational Results Partnership. And they provided us with a data dump, basically for every school and every district in the state of California, including variables of socioeconomic disadvantaged students at each school, race characteristics, and also proficiency scores in language arts and mathematics. And so we were able to connect this data set from the Educational Results Partnership to our own survey. So we sent out about 10,000 emails to administrators from across the state, and this was our response rate. We had close to 1,100 responses, so not bad, about 10% of responses. The majority of our sample is made up by principals, followed by superintendents and then human resource officers. So we were pleased with the response. We were really interested primarily in principals because they're the ones that are closest to the evaluation process. They're the ones going into the classroom, observing teachers, and actually making the mark. And so we were happy with that. One of our sort of primary concerns was, is this distribution, is this sample representative? So this map gives you a sample of the distribution, I guess, in terms of districts represented in our sample. So those districts in red are a district that we've heard from at least one administrator. And so in total, we heard from about 50% of all districts in California. As you can see, there's some clustering around the major urban areas. And so that also raised some red flags. We wanted to make sure that our sample wasn't overrepresented in different ways than the actual population of California. However, when we looked with closer investigation, we found that there are no statistical differences between our sample and the population in terms of population density measures. So in essence, the number of rural districts, number of urban districts are the same as in the population as in our sample. And so we were happy to see that result. However, our sample does have some differences between the population of California. Mainly our sample size, the schools represented in our sample are on average larger than those in the state. Also, we had an overrepresentation of white and Asian students. But again, from our qualitative interviews, we had an understanding that this type of work had never been done before. There's been no sort of survey to administrators to understand the evaluation and dismissal process. And so overall, we were satisfied with this outcome. So I'm going to pass it back to Chris, and he's going to take you through some of our results.
So one of the things that Mike alluded to was one of the reasons we decided to collect some of our own data was in our interviews with administrators, it became clear that how they actually felt about teacher performance wasn't reflected in the actual official ratings that teachers got. Many administrators said that there were underperforming teachers on their staff who continued to get satisfactory ratings. And if the official evaluation data isn't accurate, it's hard to either dismiss, to have grounds to stand on to either dismiss or to improve a teacher's performance. And so this is what spurred us to disseminate our own survey, and to that end, we asked the following question. During the 2011-2012 academic school year, how many of your teachers with permanent status, not including probationary or temp teachers, would you consider to be underperformers? And what we were hoping to gain from this is to get an idea of administrators' true thoughts about how many teachers on their staff were underperforming. And I should note that we also included in this question a little subheading that said an underperformer could still have received a satisfactory rating. So we wanted to make it clear that this was your opinion of the underperforming teachers, not necessarily just how many unsatisfactory ratings that you gave. This next diagram shows how a number of underperformers relates to unsatisfactory ratings. On average, principals responding to our survey claimed that about 13% of their teachers were underperforming. And by contrast, just a quarter of those actually received an unsatisfactory rating. And it's this difference between the number of teachers that principals felt were underperforming and the number of unsatisfactory ratings that they actually gave. That gap is what we call the measurement gap. And you can see here that we've got two different ratings in terms of that relate to teacher performance. There's first the formal unsatisfactory rating, which is what a teacher is formally given, and then there is this surveyed underperformance, as we're going to call it, which is administrators' opinion about the quality of teachers on their staff. And after we got this data, we said, well, can we relate this back to something that actually speaks to teacher quality? Are we measuring just some opinion, or does this actually have a connection to something that matters? And so what we did was we decided to compare these two measures in how predictive they were of student test scores. Now, we're not trying to say that student test scores are a perfect reflection of teacher quality. There are obviously a number of other things that go into determining whether or not someone's a quality teacher, and we're not here to necessarily purport that test scores should be the only way that teachers are evaluated. But test scores are a very important outcome of quality teaching, and one would expect that on all things being equal, student test scores would be higher in schools where there were fewer underperforming teachers and fewer unsatisfactory ratings. And so to test these two against one another, we did 3 different types of tests predicting student test proficiency, and that was measured by the proportion of students who were proficient or above in language arts and math. And the first thing we did was we just correlated each of them with student achievement, and there was a higher correlation with the surveyed underperformance than with official unsatisfactory ratings. The second thing we did was we did simple regression, built simple regression models, and then calculated fitted or predicted values from those models, and then correlated those predictions with the actual student test proficiency. And again, surveyed underperformance does better. And then finally, we built more expanded regression models that actually had a host of other variables in them that might also be predictive of student success. And we measured whether the addition of either surveyed underperformance or unsatisfactory ratings would improve model fit, and while surveyed underperformance significantly improved model fit, unsatisfactory ratings did not. And what this all really means is that surveyed underperformance really matters. It explains student test proficiency in a better way than unsatisfactory ratings. And what this really shows is that there are really large gaps in the way official evaluations are conducted. Again, there are large gaps in the way official evaluations are conducted. And that's really what this is showing. Because if we're not properly evaluating teachers, if this isn't accurate, then again, you have no ground to stand on to either help a teacher improve or to dismiss them. And so this was really important for us to show that what we're measuring out there is something that really matters. And it really informs the way that evaluations should be improved. And to talk a little bit more about our evaluation findings, I'm going to hand it off to Dennis.
Thanks, Chris. So one thing we're curious about is whether or not principals themselves believed that their evaluation systems were truly reflective of teachers' performance. So we went ahead and asked them. We asked them, please rate how much you agree with the following statement. My school's teacher evaluations accurately reflect teachers' performance. What we found was over 40% of principals said they either strongly disagreed or disagreed that their evaluations were an accurate measure of teacher performance. We were also interested to see whether or not a principal's perception of the accuracy of their evaluation system had any relationship with the number of unsatisfactory ratings that they issued to their underperforming teachers. So on the horizontal axis of this graph, of this chart, you can see that we group principals by how they responded to whether or not they believed their evaluation systems were accurate or not. On the vertical axis, we have the percentage of underperforming teachers that received unsatisfactory ratings. And what this chart demonstrates is that the more accurate a principal felt his or her evaluation system was, the more underperforming teachers were assigned unsatisfactory ratings. I'm going to hand off the mic now to talk about some of our survey results regarding teacher dismissal and teacher development. Thanks.
Thanks, Dennis. So Dennis's results kind of point to the fact that evaluations are really important in identifying underperforming teachers, and it seems like those schools that have better evaluation systems also have fewer underperformers. But what happens after you identify those underperformers? You can either pursue teacher development or you can pursue teacher dismissal. So we wanted to get a better sense of how those things work in California, and I'll start with the development side. So in California, the peer assisted review program is the primary source of professional developments funded by the state. And so we first asked principals, does your school have a PAR program? On average, 60% of the respondents said that, yeah, we have a PAR program. So then we said, okay, well, how would you rate the effectiveness of it? How well is your PAR program? On a scale from not at all effective to, yeah, our PAR program is pretty good. So what do we find? We find that principals that perceive their PAR program as not at all effective have, on average, more than twice the number of underperforming teachers. So those schools with high-performing peer development programs have fewer underperforming teachers, which is a pretty interesting finding. So we wanted to explore a little deeper and see what are the development effects of an effective development program, I guess. How does this measure an improvement? And so we asked principals, of the teachers that you assign unsatisfactory ratings, how many are now teaching at a satisfactory level? So if you assign them an unsatisfactory level or a rating, are they improving at a satisfactory level now? So again, we see that those principals that report having a very effective peer assistance review program improve about half the teachers that are in unsatisfactory to a satisfactory level. This is compared to like 5% if you don't have a good professional development program. So these results support the idea that professional development is important, and we're going to further discuss the implications of these findings in the discussion section. But now I'm going to move on to dismissal. We wanted to gain an understanding of how many teachers principals would like to replace. And so we asked them, last year, of the underperforming teachers that you identified, how many of them do you want to get rid of? And then we asked them, how many unsatisfactory ratings did you actually assign? And so an unsatisfactory rating is the first step in pursuing a formal dismissal. And so we kind of wanted to compare the results to see if the teachers that you want to get rid of are actually assigned unsatisfactory ratings. So here's what we found. This is per principal or per school. So we found that per school, principals report having about 3.6 underperforming teachers. Of those underperformers, they want to get rid of 80% of them, suggesting that these teachers are bad and we need to dismiss them from the school. But when we asked them how many unsatisfactory ratings did you actually give out, they said less than 1. So again, 25% are actually getting unsatisfactory ratings, suggesting that a lot of teachers that principals would like to remove are still in the classroom. So when we looked at the relationship between evaluations and removing teachers, we suspected that evaluations play a big role in determining which teachers to remove. So we find that the principals that report having a very accurate evaluation system actually remove more teachers from their schools. So this is just evidence to support that claim. But this measure of removal it includes the formal dismissal process, but it also includes other types of strategies principals utilize to remove underperforming teachers, such as counseling them out or pushing them to retirement. And so we really wanted to understand how often the formal dismissal process is used. And so we asked principals, last school year, how many formal dismissal charges did you file? And then to get a sense of longevity, we asked them over your current tenure, or over your tenure at your current school, how many dismissal charges have you filed? So our results sort of supported this fact, or this hunch that dismissal charges are seldom pursued. Last year, 88% of principals did not file a single dismissal charge. Very few of them filed more than one. And on average, every principal claimed that they wanted to remove 3, but as you can see here, not all of them even pursued 1, let alone more than 1. And this is also true if you look at the tenure of a principal. So asking them how many dismissal charges they filed, the average tenure of a principal in our survey was 5.5 years. So on average, the past 5.5 years, principals, 75% of principals have never filed a dismissal charge, which is pretty interesting. So we wanted to understand, principals aren't utilizing the formal dismissal process. Why is that, I guess? So we asked principals, thinking about the teachers that you want to remove, what's preventing you from actually removing them? So we allowed them to identify or pick 3 top reasons why, or the perceived barriers to dismissal, and this is what we found. So the top 3 responses were a lack of district support. So that means principals felt like their districts weren't supporting them enough to actually remove ineffective teachers. Next, we found that the time and evidence required to actually pursue a dismissal is too great, and it deters principals from going through that process. And finally, the most common response was a perceived low success probability. And this may point to some cultural factors. Principals just don't think that they can remove teachers. And this sort of supports some ideas that were given to us in the qualitative interviews. This picture shows the formal dismissal process and its 10 steps. So within these 10 steps, teachers that want to be removed have 3 chances to appeal the process. And from our interview data, we found that this process can take up to 4 years and cost as much as roughly $200,000 per case. And so when we asked superintendents the same question, why aren't you guys removing teachers? They said it's too expensive, which really makes sense. And also, because it's too expensive for the districts, principals aren't getting the support from the districts, right? So it kind of supports our findings. But to discuss all of our main findings and some of the implications for policy, I'm going to hand it off to Dennis. That's Mike.
So based on the data that we collected, we came to a number of conclusions and formulated several policy recommendations that I'm now going to discuss. The first conclusion that we came to is regarding dismissal policies. And that is that administrators view the current process for dismissing teachers as costly and cumbersome. Now, there are a lot of methods that could be used to alleviate some of the concerns that administrators have with the dismissal process in a way that could improve teacher quality. First, the California Education Code could be amended to limit the number of appeals during the teacher dismissal process. Research needs to be conducted to see whether or not, in the current process, a lot of decisions are being overturned during the appeals decision. But if there are a few reversals, it may make sense to limit the number of appeals that teachers can make. And doing so could save school districts hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal costs each year. Another option would be to increase the amount of time that principals and administrators have to evaluate probationary teachers. So in California, new teachers have probationary status for their first 2 years of teaching. And they're essentially at-will employees whose employment can be terminated relatively easily. At the end of the 2 years, school districts are required to give these teachers permanent status, at which point it becomes very difficult to dismiss them. Research has shown that for new teachers, in the first 3 to 4 years, the quality of their teaching improves and then sort of plateaus after the 4th year. If administrators are given more time to evaluate teachers, by the end of the 3rd or 4th year, they'll have a better idea of whether or not these teachers are going to be good instructors before having to make the decision of whether or not to grant them permanent status. If principals are better informed, that they have less risk of giving permanent status to a teacher that in the future may be deemed underperforming and they'll wish to dismiss. In lieu of amending the California Education Code, another option is just to have principals be stricter about who they grant permanent status to. The main benefit of this is that it would require no legislative changes to the California Education Code. It's simply a matter of principals deciding to set a higher threshold for teachers to meet in order for them to get permanent status. The second conclusion that we have is along the lines of teacher development, and that is that teacher development may have a positive impact on performance. Now this sounds really intuitive, but you'd be surprised how much research has been done to claim that teacher development has much less of an impact than many people think. But the results of our research show that PAR programs can in fact improve performance, and we showed that by showing that principals that believe they had effective PAR programs had fewer underperforming teachers, and were also able to improve the performance of their underperforming teachers to a satisfactory level, more so than administrators who did not have effective PAR programs. Unfortunately, the scope of our research precluded us from identifying what exactly makes a PAR program effective. But we feel like this is important research that needs to be done. Once that research is able to identify what programs and activities make a PAR program effective, it may be worth it to try to install these programs in school districts throughout California. One thing that needs to be considered, though, is that PAR programs can be rather expensive, and that additional funding from the state may be necessary to actually get effective programs in all school districts. So up until now, I've been discussing changes that can be made to both the dismissal policies and development policies for teachers in their practices. But based on our research, we actually don't think that development and dismissal policies are the root of the problem of teacher quality. It's actually a problem with evaluation systems. And that is that current evaluation systems are not reflective of teacher performance. Now, we showed you evidence of this by showing that principals routinely assign satisfactory ratings to underperforming teachers. So a reasonable question to ask is this even a big problem or not? And our response is that yes, this is a huge problem that we need to pay attention to. So we talked to school administrators, teachers, principals, union officials throughout the state, and there were 2 important functions that came out from our discussions that an effective evaluation program needs to have. First, an effective evaluation program needs to be able to identify underperformers who can improve and provide the necessary feedback for them to take action. Second, an effective evaluation program will build a case for dismissing perpetual underperformers and be able to remove them from the classrooms. Unfortunately, California evaluation systems are not good at either of these 2 functions. So what can be done? In order to improve evaluation systems across California, school districts really need to overhaul their evaluation systems. These new systems need to be focused on improving teacher instruction, and they need to be able to identify perpetually underperforming teachers so that it can be removed from the classroom quickly. Fortunately, there's good reason to believe that such a system could actually be implemented in school districts across the state. And that reason is because we actually came across one district that seems to be coming pretty close to accomplishing both of these goals. When we spoke to administrators in this district, they told us that in order to implement their comprehensive evaluation program, they first needed to implement a culture change, whereby everybody in their district was focused on development and accountability. To start with, the district changed their binary rating system from an unsatisfactory system to a 3-level system, whereby teachers were rated as meeting expectations, minimally meeting expectations, or not meeting expectations. And this allowed principals to distinguish underperforming teachers who just needed some professional development to become quality instructors from underperforming teachers who were perpetually underperforming and were unwilling or unable to change their practices, and that could be dismissed. The other thing we found with this district is that this district conducted more observations than any other district that we encountered. Administrators told us that it was not uncommon for teachers being formally evaluated to receive 40 or more evaluations during the school year, after which teachers would receive meaningful feedback on how they could take action to improve. That's not convincing enough. When we spoke to this district, they told us that before implementing their comprehensive evaluation program, they were dismissing 2 to 3 teachers a year. And after they implemented their program, they were able to dismiss more than 20 underperforming teachers per year. So what this school district was able to do was reform their evaluation system in a way that closed the measurement gap on teacher performance. They were able to improve teacher quality by implementing evaluation systems that provided meaningful feedback to teachers very frequently so they can improve. And furthermore, their evaluation system allowed them to document and collect evidence on perpetually underperforming teachers who were just unwilling to change their practices. So we believe that if school districts across the state were able to implement evaluation systems similar to the one that we observed in this district, that teacher quality overall in California could be improved. Instead of focusing on policies and practices that can be changed during the development and dismissal stages, instead, the entire California education system may be better served if stakeholders really focus upstream and look at how to fix the evaluation systems across the state and eliminate the measurement gap. So this concludes the formal part of our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Yeah, for that case study, do you know if their reform of the evaluation process, do you know if that led to improved outcomes like test scores or anything like that?
So we didn't get test score data, or at least we don't have longitudinal test score data for that district. So it's difficult for us to say whether or not there were significant increases at least on that end. Certainly, as Dennis was just talking about, it certainly made it more efficient for them to be able to identify the struggling teachers and then decide whether or not they were going to move in a development or a dismissal direction. We do know that, and I think Dennis, you might have mentioned this, that it really happened with the introduction of the new superintendent there, who was really focused on accountability.
How did they, at that district, get past the issue of cost? Because you said a lot of the districts were reticent to go there because of cost.
Well, so one of the things with cost is that they claim that it takes a long time to go through the process and collect all this evidence. But the way this district has it set up is that they're evaluating teachers and collecting evidence simultaneously. So the entire process that people typically think of is actually shortened, because it's not like in other districts, sometimes the principal will say, this teacher's underperforming, I need to go collect data on them now. Instead, this district is saying, let's collect data, let's evaluate teachers, and as we're evaluating, let's collect the data. So that if we decide to move forward with dismissal, we don't have to wait to start collecting data. We can just start with the process immediately. And that saves a lot of costs.
How often did you guys receive more than one response from a district? And then generally speaking, how closely do those responses match?
So we got about, we didn't necessarily, there weren't a whole lot of cases in which we actually had a ton of overlap. I'd say, did we do comparisons? I'm not sure.
So we were mostly surveying principals, right? So it's uncommon to get a principal and a vice principal from the same school responding to us. So I don't even think that occurred at all. We did have principals from the same district, like Los Angeles Unified is a gigantic district, respond to us. But again, a lot of the questions we were asking were school specific. We didn't ask district questions to principals. So that really wasn't an issue for us.
Are there cases where the teacher evaluation systems and or standards are the subject of collective bargaining agreements with the union?
Yeah, so that takes place at the district level. So for each district, they're collectively bargained there between the teachers union and the principals and administrators. But on average, we found that pretty much everyone uses the same type of system, this sort of binary satisfactory or unsatisfactory ratings. I think
There's some variation. But I mean, that was definitely a problem with, especially with that measure, was just the granularity, like how much detail you get when the final outcome, the final measure doesn't necessarily give a lot of room to differentiate between.
So if the case study that you described is regarded by the union as a likely outcome of the reforms you're talking about, aren't you going to get resistance to?
So we actually talked to several high-ranking officials at CTA, and they're all for improving the quality of instruction, but they want to make sure that they protect due process rights for good teachers. And if you can show that a teacher is perpetually underperforming, they have no problem with removing bad teachers. I mean, there's a certain amount of pride in the teaching profession that you're going to try and make sure that everyone is a good teacher, and they take pride in that. They take pride in the fact that they're delivering quality education. And we actually found that there isn't, at least from the people that we talked to, there isn't a lot of, they're not trying to defend bad teachers or poor performing teachers. They just want to make sure that every teacher gets their fair shake when it comes to defending themselves from dismissal.
First off, I think you three did a great job presenting this topic, which is challenging not only within this state, but I think nationwide. I also believe firmly that you could have selected one of many or any government institution to fill in the blank. You may have found kind of the same item. And I say that because I think the overall, my humble and widely ignored opinion, the overall challenge here is leadership, because you over and over again identify three common themes, whether you realize it or not, and that's in training and development, evaluation, and hiring and firing. Three basic fundamental leadership principles that sound like they're not being addressed adequately. And the other thing I picked up on is the fact that there was a continual point back to either the organization or organizational processes, which I also believe are very poor excuses. And I would like to ask, on the case study that you brought up, was that coincident with the replacement of a key player in that organization?
Yes.
Okay.
It was not coincidence. So they brought in a new superintendent. He sort of engineered this cultural shift, and then also figure out how their evaluation system is going to work.
Perfect. That's what I thought. Thank you. Jeanette?
Great job. Looking forward to further discussion tomorrow and elsewhere around this too. So you mentioned that in general, teaching evaluation in the state or the country isn't very effective by sort of the numbers of ineffective people that are identified, right? And then you asked a question of folks, how effective do they think their evaluation system is in identifying underperformers? And 60% of them were satisfied, right? Because 40 weren't satisfied.
So I think the middle measure was either satisfied or dissatisfied.
So I guess what questions come up for you, or what does the data speak to in terms of the amount of folks that are identified as underperformers and the perception that leaders, school or district, have around the effectiveness of their evaluation system? Were you able to dig more deeply into that?
I think we did have a chart up here that was showing the level of agreement with the proportion of underperforming teachers.
Right.
Which and so that showed a very clear trend that if you strongly, if the more that you agree, the more that the administrator agreed that their evaluation practices were an accurate reflection, they were able to, what was it? I think it was right. They were able to provide more unsatisfactory ratings. That's what it was.
But you don't have data necessarily on those districts about the number of teachers that were identified as underperforming, right? You only have individual principal data for them.
We also got, we didn't ask for numbers from superintendents, but we asked for proportions just because we asked superintendents to give an estimate of the proportion of teachers in their districts that were underperforming. So in that sense, we've got that kind of higher level estimate of how many underperforming teachers there are per district. But we didn't have we didn't try to model the exact number of underperformers in each district based off of our responses because we didn't have tons of schools necessarily to be representative of a single district, if that makes sense. So I mean, we could extrapolate based off the superintendent estimations.
Yeah, and I guess part of my bottom line question around this is the extent to which underperformers exist in the system is sort of still not quite known, right? When you look at that case study, it's 20% of them were dismissed compared to 2 or 3%. So do we know what the universe of general underperformers
I mean, the general number was, when we surveyed all our principals, the average figure was 13%. 13% of their staff.
That was the average.
That actually maps very closely to what superintendents said too.
Right. They were very similar estimates.
It's like 12.7%, I think, is what superintendents said. I guess it's underperformers.
We'll continue to talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
Is there any definition of underperforming teachers that you're relying on or the principals are relying on? Because it's a really broad concept. And then perhaps it links to why principals were reluctant to let go of some of these. Was it a sense that there's a potential for improvement or that there were extenuating circumstances for a lack of accomplishment of a certain task? So in other words, was underperforming task-based or related to test scores, or was it engagement with the students, or was it disciplinary problems? Could you elaborate on that?
So on the first point, we provided a description of what underperformance is, and it's effectively, they're ineffective at teaching students. And we said, they may have received a satisfactory rating, but in your view of them, they're still not effectively teaching students up to a level of performance that you deem satisfactory.
Did you go more granular? You're talking about the eval being more granular, which is a great concept in terms of what are they not failing to do?
Oh, right.
We left it as general as possible. I mean, again, this was largely exploratory. We decided to actually conduct the survey because we had administrators saying that that their estimates of underperformance was a lot greater than satisfactory ratings. So we just wanted to get just a baseline idea, but absolutely, the follow-up to that is, well, what particular things are teachers failing to do? And you're right, that could take a number there could be a number of different reasons for why teachers are underperforming. To get to your second question, which was related to, sorry.
So principals answered that they only want to remove about 80% of that performers. So, we hypothesized that 20% are teachers that are underperforming, but principals still believe can improve to a satisfactory level. So we think, they're not meeting standards by the principal's perception, but with some more help, they can get a certain level. So they don't want to remove them.
And it's really important that really highlights why it's important to say that proper evaluation is important, whether or not you're trying to dismiss or trying to improve. Because clearly principals will say, well, I've got underperforming teachers, but I think that I can work with them too. So again, all three, dismissal, development, evaluation, are really intertwined.
I don't know enough about the evaluation process, but is it possible that the principals are underreporting the underperforming teachers because they see these possible barriers in the future of reporting a lot of unsatisfactory teachers, and then they have to deal with that, right? And that might be costly, or it might be because of dismissal or training.
So I don't see why they would underreport on our survey. That makes sense for not giving everyone an unsatisfactory rating.
I just think that might explain some of that gap. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely. Like anticipating
yes.
the barriers might be a big thing. Yeah, absolutely.
So we have an anecdote about one administrator that we talked to who had an unofficial rating system where he said that he rated teachers 1, 2, and 3. 1 is, they're doing fine. 2 is like, they're struggling. 3 is, I definitely want to get rid of that. But, that doesn't show up on a binary evaluation system. And in fact, the people who he said were 3s who he really wants to get rid of, only a subset of them received unsatisfactory ratings.
And part of the reasoning for why he did that is he knew that there was only so much, there's a lot of work that goes into being able to justify an unsatisfactory rating. And doing that kicks off a process that creates a lot of extra work and time for the principal. And that was one thing that we observed too, is that a lot of these principals are under a lot of, like a huge time crunch in order to be able to get everything done, and they're not necessarily prepared to tackle all the problems that they're tasked with.
And Nick Drew gets the last question.
Yeah, I just was, and I don't know if there's any data for this, but my sense is if you have anecdotally or maybe had some data on, especially in those cases like your case study where there were more dismissals than others, my gut is that becomes a motivating factor that some of those French teachers and everybody kind of steps up their game, and I just don't know if you had any evidence to support that, because the whole idea, we're going to dismiss teachers because we want to make things better. I mean, did you actually see any sort of evidence to that effect?
I don't know if we have any quantitative data on that, but the administrators that we spoke to with from that district said that, this is kind of a self-perpetuating cycle, and that this really built a culture of excellence in a way. So teachers wanted to compete with each other, they all want to be better, and it's overall just lifted or increased the level of performance. So yeah, I don't know if we can measure, we didn't measure that, but maybe something further research can address.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we were talking about administrators in our survey. A follow-up would be to ask teachers themselves some of these questions.
Great, thank you. That's great. We'll take a 5-minute transition break, get the next team up here.